Okay, yeah, I think we can start. I see still people are joining, but many already joined, so I'll go ahead and start. Hello and welcome to today's webinar, where we're excited to be joined by GRC 2020 analyst Michael Rasmussen to discuss why it is that policy and training management is so critical for ESG programs and how organizations can increase engagement with compliance, training, policies, and procedure. The webinar is due to last around 45 minutes, starting with a talk from Michael on why ESG is so important for organizations to get right and what an effective, engaging ESG program looks like. I will then take you through a short demo of Learning Zone's next generation policy and training management platform, Echo, where you will see how easy it is to achieve that all-important engagement when you integrate policy and training management. To help things flowing, as there is a lot of ground to cover, we'll run a Q&A session at the end of the presentation. So please send your questions through using the chat function, and we'll do our best to answer as many as we can at the end of the session. The webinar will be recorded, and we'll email a link to the recording and other resources mentioned along with the summary of the session in due course. With no further ado, Michael, let me hand over to introduce yourself and take us through why ESG is such a hot topic right now and why effective policy and training management is so key to success. Let me just give it a permission. It's yours.
Excellent. It is a pleasure to be here and interact with each and every one of you. Just 1 second while I share the screen here. And there we go. Hopefully you can see the screen and we're good to go. In that context, I'm Michael Rasmussen. I'm an analyst. My job is research. I've got 30 years of experience and 23 of those as an analyst. I spent 7 years at Forrester Research as one of their top analysts. And ever since leaving Forrester at the end of 2007, I've been independent. So my competitors are Gartner and Forrester. I spend my days understanding what the challenges are that companies face in the context of governance, risk management, and compliance, and what we call GRC, and how do we go about solving those problems with strategy, process, and technology. Now, a couple of the threads of my research come together in this particular webinar. I'm very busy in policy and training management. I have my whole policy management by design research paper that's on my website, as well as a workshop I teach called Policy Management by Design, and been very involved with PolicyManagementPro.com, part of oseg.org, and wrote their content on and certification for the Certified Policy Management Professional. So very busy in this policy and training management area, but also the other part of my research that is extremely busy is ESG, environmental, social governance, and around the world, around the globe, country after country, industry after industry, organization after organization, how do you respond to ESG? And so in this webinar, we're talking about how these come together, policy and training management and ESG. I have a slide coming up, but I'll steal the thunder right now because it's the basis for this whole presentation, is that you cannot do ESG. You can't even begin ESG without looking at policies. When somebody comes to me and says, how do we start an ESG strategy and do ESG reporting? My very first response to them, what do your policies say? Your code of conduct, your inclusivity, diversity policies, your modern slavery policies, your environmental policies, your anti-bribery and corruption policies, and many more. They define what your ESG program is. And so you cannot do and deliver ESG without starting with policy management. It's your policies, which is the starting block out of the gates to deliver on ESG. Now, basically, I told you the heart of what we're getting at, but let's dive into it a lot deeper now. I have a whole blog on this, A Tale of Two Futures. You can tell from this that I love science fiction, but I also love Charles Dickens and English literature. A Tale of Two Futures, been on Tale of Two Cities. Is our future a Blade Runner future, or is it a Star Trek future? Are we headed to that dystopia of Blade Runner where it's an environmental and social disaster? Or are we headed towards that future of Star Trek, where you look at Earth in the Star Trek universe in its time, and it's a very green environment with green technology. And of course, there's movies, so there's tensions, but you have intergalactic cooperation of alien species, not just races. And so it's a very different future in Star Trek than it is in Blade Runner. And the decisions that organizations make, not just governments and individuals, but the decisions organizations make sets us on the path to one of these two futures, whether it's Blade Runner or Star Trek, or most likely somewhere in between. Now, for myself, I certainly hope that our future is a Star Trek future and not a Blade Runner future. But one of the challenges that we face in our organizations is the complexity and the interconnectedness of risks and compliance. ESG is very broad, and we're going to unpack this in just a few short slides coming up. The physicist Friedrich Capra stated, the more we study the major problems of our time, the more we come to realize that they cannot be understood in isolation. They are systemic problems, which means that they are interconnected and interdependent. Our risks are interdependent. ESG is interconnected as well. Let's just go back a few years to the start of COVID-19. What started off with it as a health and safety risk cascades into IT security risks, which would be under the G in ESG, privacy risk, which would be under the S in ESG, increased risk of fraud because of the uncertainty in economic times, which would be under the G, increased risk of bribery and corruption as ports were shut down and limited government contracts and permits. There's greater risk that somebody might bribe a foreign government official. Increased risk of modern slavery because of the of factories going dark in the supply chain, reopening of child labor or forced labor. It's an interconnected risk environment. This is navigating chaos. Leonardo da Vinci said, realize that everything connects to everything else. And in the same context as with ESG, is it involves a lot of different departments and functions. And they can't act as little Lone Ranger silos. They've got to be able to act integrated and collaboratively. So we're moving from a past to a future. In the past, we've had terms like corporate social responsibility, CSR, or sustainability. Now, too often when we had corporate social responsibility, it was too often passed around the organization like a hot potato and often landed in the lap of marketing and became a branding exercise. When somebody comes up with a brilliant idea, let's put green in our logo to show how environmental friendly we are. And it was just more of a marketing exercise instead of reality. That was a lot of the old school CSR programs over the last 20 years. ESG is different. Environmental social governance has a lot of teeth. Corporate investors like BlackRock, State Street, Vanguard, they're making investment decisions in businesses based on ESG metrics. Individual board members are being voted out if they don't hit ESG metrics. Your employees are making, or prospective employees are making decisions on who they work for, not just on salary and benefits, but on shared values. Customers are doing the same. They're deciding who they do business with based on shared values. And the regulators are picking up on it. There's a vast array of regulations out there, some very narrow and specific, just tackling parts of ESG, like climate change reporting, or modern slavery, or bribery and corruption, or privacy. But then there's broad legislation too, things that are requiring ESG reports, particularly in UK and Europe, very broadly. And on top of that, you've got legislation like Germany's Corporation Supply Chain Due Diligence Act. That's significant. If you're not paying attention to that, you better, because it's going to have a global impact bigger than GDPR ever did. And GDPR had a huge impact. I'm not minimizing that. But you better pay attention to Germany's Corporation Supply Chain Due Diligence Act. The modern organization is not defined by brick and mortar walls and traditional employees. The modern organization is the extended enterprise of third-party relationships, suppliers, vendors, outsourcers, service providers, contractors, consultants, brokers, agents, dealers, partners, temporaries, and more. Oh my, so many. You walk down the halls of many organizations and half the people you walk by are not employees. They are third parties. Their issues are your issues. Their commitment to ESG reflects your commitment to ESG. And Germany's Corporation Supply Chain Due Diligence Act, which went into effect for one stage of January 1st of this year, just a month and a half ago. If you have 3,000 or more employees in Germany, you've got to do extensive, ongoing, continuous due diligence around ESG in your supply chain, vendor, third-party relationships, not just at the first level, all the way down the supply chain, nth level, and provide assurance on that. That's significant. And so policies and training are going to come in very importantly there. I spent a couple years on one Fortune 100 company's social accountability advisory board dealing with supply chain code of conduct. What's that? A policy. And how do you engage that across 5,000 vendors with 20,000 facilities? And they required at least one person in each facility to review their supply chain code of conduct and go through supply chain code of conduct training, the training course on that, in 20,000 facilities globally. That's significant. Now, Germany's law, well, you better pay attention to it, because next year it goes down to 1,000 employees. If you have operations in Germany and you have greater than 1,000 employees, it applies to you. But it also applies indirectly to most of you on the phone, because you might not have those operations in Germany, but you're part of a supply chain, vendor, outsourcing, service provider, some type of relationship with German companies. Yeah, guess what? You've got to respond to it. You've got to address it. And you better have ESG working in your organization, because it's going to impact you. But then there's a corresponding EU directive that requires every member country of the EU to pass similar legislation to Germany's. It's absolutely huge. This is global. It's impacting us from multiple directions, ESG. It's not just our brick and mortar business, but our extended enterprise. And policy management and training management are key to success in this area. So let's unpack ESG and look at its components and the scope and breadth of what it is. Environmental, social governance. Too often when we approach ESG, I see organizations that remind me of the parable, the blind man and the elephant, where one blind man fills the elephant's side and says, oh, it's a wall. Somebody else fills the trunk and says, oh, or the tail, so it's a rope. Somebody fills the leg, oh, it's a tree. They all have different perspectives. Somebody thinks ESG is all about the environment. Somebody else thinks ESG is all about the social aspects and modern slavery. Guess what? It's broad, it's deep. There's a lot of pieces to this puzzle, and you've got to address and put this together. There's not one department that does everything ESG. It involves a lot of different departments working together collaboratively: corporate compliance and ethics, legal, human resources, environmental groups, the health and safety group, the privacy, IT security, internal controls, procurement, dealing with modern slavery and things like that. There's so many different aspects to this that requires cooperation and collaboration across the organization. The environmental aspect is the big focus right now. And we're seeing a lot of regulation development, but it's also the area where there's probably for the short term, the most forgiveness, because nobody's completely figured this out. And we're dealing with climate change and use of natural resources and air, water, waste, pollution, and so forth. There's a lot here, but we also have a lot to still figure out, but it's getting the most attention. The S aspect is the most unforgiving right now. Maybe the E will get there, and I believe it will, but right now the S is the most unforgiving. If you have issues of child labor and forced labor and inclusivity and diversity issues, they're going to haunt your organization, not just for months or years, but potentially decades. Anytime child labor comes up, certain brand names come to our mind as the poster childs for child labor. These are significant issues that have reputation damage. The social aspect is broad. And as I mentioned, I've already sat on the Social Accountability Advisory Board from one global Fortune 100 company, but you're dealing with things like child labor, forced labor, modern slavery issues, social economic inequality, diversity, inclusion, and its opposite, harassment and discrimination, working conditions, health and safety, digital rights like privacy. Yes, privacy is part of the S. As we're dealing about personal information, this is a social risk, product liability, stakeholder opposition, and so much more. The governance piece is where we have the most maturity in organization. And it's where things come together and have the most consistency. The environmental aspect varies quite a bit from industry to industry. The environmental program at a bank is quite a bit different from the environmental program at a mining corporation or a manufacturing corporation. Even the social aspect has a lot of variance. But guess what? The governance, there's a lot more consistency. Here we're dealing with corporate governance, fraud, internal controls over financial reporting, anti-bribery and corruption like U.S. Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, UK Bribery Act, CEP&DO in France, anti-money laundering and sanctions, information security, corporate behavior, anti-competitive practices, tax transparency, beneficial ownership and structure of the organization. That's all part of the governance piece of this. Now, there's also something to note here that there's variation around the world, and you've got to keep this in mind. that not all values are shared globally. What might be considered strong values in Europe and in North America, like the United States and Canada, might not be the same values in the Middle East or parts of Asia or Africa. And this particularly plays out in the social aspect in dealing with inclusivity and diversity, that there's variance in different parts of the world based on religion and culture. And that's significant because, how's this all going to play out over time? There's a lot to be determined. Now, the modern organization approaching ESG has to be able to see the tree as well as the forest. That individual ESG domain, whether it's the broad domain like environmental, social, or governance, or a lot of the subdomains like anti-bribery and corruption and modern slavery issues and inclusivity and diversity. We have to be able to see those trees as well as the forest. But it's actually a little more complex than that, because the organization also has to really be able to manage and see the leaves and the branches. That behavior of that manager that reflects in issues of harassment and discrimination can unfold and impact that broader tree and the forest and infect it all and cause a forest fire of ESG. Those little things that matter, those transactions and things in the environment, we have to keep on top of those. And that's significant. That's challenging for the organization. But it's what we're up against, the tree and the forest, but also the leaves and the branches. But a lot of ESG engagement programs for policies, training, and awareness and things, they're a mess. Like, consider this large insurance company that came into COVID-19. And all of a sudden, because of a health and safety risk, which could be part of the S in ESG, they're moving to people to a work from home environment, like many of us did. Well, pretty much all of us did. But in this context, information security, part of the G in ESG, information security requirements are changing in the home office. There's privacy requirements, because how do we manage privacy of personal data when there's roommates and spouse and children and visitors and others in that home office? And so there's privacy issues, part of the S in ESG. And there's so much more. And this insurance company is coming to me and says, we've got a problem. We're moving people to this work from home environment. We need to communicate home office IT security policies, home office expense policies. We need to do all these things. We've got to remind, in areas of harassment, discrimination, we have to remind people that just because they're working from home, the same rules apply on Zoom meetings and team meetings as if they're in a corporate conference room. And so they said our problem is we found that we have 28 different policy portals in the organization. Some are SharePoint sites, some are file shares, some are commercial software. We need a single policy portal to be able to bring all this together and manage this. One organization was telling me that they're spending 200 hours to build a report for the board of directors on all the different types of incidents, ethical incidents, cases, investigations, all related to ESG in some aspect. 200 hours to build one report because everything was scattered in different documents and silos. Another firm was telling me that 80% of their staff time for compliance areas, including policies and training and all this stuff, 80% of their staff time was chasing emails, documents, and spreadsheets and not actually managing compliance. And gosh, I went to law school and I didn't spend all this time in college and graduate school to be managing documents, spreadsheets, and emails. I'm there to actually make a difference and improve things. But a lot of our professional time is spent chasing emails that shouldn't be chased. These are all significant issues in the organization. That your compliance programs are these huge mountains of manual processes, paper trails, emails, documents, spreadsheets, emails that are a mess. And collectively need to do a lot better job at addressing this. But we also need a defensible audit trail and system of record for all this. If you want to prove ESG in your organization, well, you better have clearly defensible audit trails on this. And we'll talk more about this at the very end. But I also find that a lot of organizations are finding that they have too many people sending too many messages in too many ways related to policy and training communications related to ESG, as well as more broadly. That there's too many policy and training portals and things. We haven't brought this together. There's manual processes and approaches. We got to have a better, more streamlined approach, particularly in this era of ESG, where we need streamlined, consistent communications to help ensure that the organization is an organization of integrity. That what we define as our ESG program is reflected in policies and it's lived out in the organization. It's absolutely critical. Instead, a lot of organizations I come across when they're dealing with ESG programs and broader GRC programs, to me, it reminds me of the Winchester Mystery House in San Jose, California. This is a sprawling mansion that was built in the 1800s. It cost $5.5 million to build then. It was one very expensive house when you calculate inflation. It took 38 years to build, but the key is it had no design, no blueprint, no architect. That's a lot of organizations, ESG and GRC programs today, that over the last 38 years, we have had, 140 different builders of GRC and ESG in their different aspects and domains, and nobody's stepping back and saying this is the way it should work. And when the example of the Winchester Mystery House, you have doors that open to walls or 20-foot drops, staircases that go up or down to nowhere. It doesn't make sense. Organizations need to step back and take an enterprise approach to policy and training management, particularly in the context of ESG. Instead of having 28 portals for policies out there, there should be a singular portal for policies that makes consistent and cohesive sense to the organization and employees, particularly with the distributed workforce, the remote working and hybrid working, that it's easy to access and engage employees in policies and training activities, no matter what they are, whether it's an HR policy, whether it's an IT policy, whether it's an accounting policy, a manufacturing policy, code of conduct or legal policy. Well, it doesn't matter, that they're all there in one place for policies and training. And this is absolutely necessary in this era of ESG. So I ask you now, what is your organization's alignment? Now, I'm, 52 years old this year. So I'm a child of the 80s. My formative teen years were all in the 1980s. I loved to play at that time Dungeons and Dragons. And when you play Dungeons and Dragons, one of the things you have to do is choose your character's alignment. Are you a lawful good character, like that virtuous knight? Are you a chaotic evil character, like that person that just wants to destroy everything and blow things up? Are you chaotic good or lawful evil? There's a variety of these. The lawful, and I've taken this model of alignments and applied it to organizations. Are you a lawful good organization? That's that crusader organization, the organization that acts within the boundaries of laws and aims to be a good corporate citizen, giving back to the community and making the world a better place. That might sound virtuous, but there's probably few and far between of those. Most organizations are probably more lawful neutral. This is the organization that acts within laws, traditions, and codes and finds order and organization critical, but does so in a way without being a zealot. This is an honorable and realistic organization. Or perhaps there's several that are actually lawful evil organizations. This is the dominator organization that loves order, structures of accountability, and laws, but aggressively pursues its own cause without thinking of the good of others. It is an organization acting with honor in self-interest. But you might be a neutral good, chaotic good, or I don't think we'll find any, or personally, I don't think we're going to find a pure lawful good organization. And I don't think we're going to find a pure chaotic evil. I mean, lawful good is like Superman. While to me, Batman, depending on what version of Batman you look at, tends to be more of a chaotic good. The Joker is a very chaotic evil, and just blow up everything, destroy everything, and laugh while you're doing it. Hopefully you're not finding any organization like that. Darth Vader in the Empire be very lawful evil. But that gives you some perspective. But what's your organization? Because this applies to ESG. What are our values? What are we seeking? How do we balance capitalism and also valuing the environment and social aspects and our cause as an organization to embrace those efforts? And where does that place you? All this gets reflected in your culture. There's the ABC model. I'm part of the Institute of Risk Management out of London. I'm one of their honorary life members and global ambassadors of risk management. And one of the resources we have is Risk Culture Resources for Practitioners. And in that, we have the ABC model, the attitudes, behavior, and culture. The attitudes of individuals, whether it's executives, such as tone at the top, or operational management, that tone at the middle, or the frontline employees, like the teller at the bank, the coal miner in the coal mine, the insurance agent out there in the field, the doctor, nurse in a hospital. Their attitudes shapes the behavior of the organization. That behavior forms what your true culture is. And does that reflect the policies, or is it something else? That culture, in turn, reflects further attitudes and behavior. Now, you properly enforce policies out there, shape and guide the culture. Or otherwise, culture completely separates and detaches itself from policies, and policies are a fictitious mirror, smoke and mirrors that don't really show what the culture is. Now, the proper organization is going to have policies that are enforced and monitored and shape and guide the culture. You can have culture destroyed overnight by the wrong decisions. It can take years or decades to repair. It takes a long time to shape and guide culture. I've got a policy here in my laptop. Back in the year 2000, it was the model policy. Other organizations were copying it to be their policy. In fact, I had a petroleum company at my policy management by design workshop in Minneapolis that said we nearly copied that policy word for word to be our policy. And what I'm talking about is Enron's code of conduct. Yes, Enron. For you Generation Z and millennials that don't know your accounting history, Enron was what led to Sarbanes-Oxley law, because they might have had the model policy out there, the right code of conduct. They had a culture that was just corrupt and fraud, massive fraud that was going in a completely different direction. Your policies need to guide and shape the culture, not be a fictitious smoke and mirrors while the culture goes somewhere else. It's important that we guide and live by our policies in our organization, and that's also delivered through training and communication. And this is more important in the ESG era now because there's so much being reflected and measured in the organization in this context. So moving forward, we need to sort of herd the cats, where there's a lot of different departments related for ESG, whether it's corporate compliance and ethics, human resources, IT security, privacy, health and safety, procurement, finance and accounting. There's so many departments that have a role in ESG. It's like pieces to the puzzle. Your organization has a lot of these pieces, something happening already. But you take a puzzle and you just throw it on the table and the pieces scatter all over. Yeah, you have those puzzle pieces. You have that privacy piece out there somewhere in your organization that's part of the S in ESG. You've got that bribery and corruption piece, probably being led by corporate compliance and ethics out there. You've got the IT security. You've got the environmental and the health and safety. Maybe there's puzzle pieces you're missing, but you've got a lot of these pieces, but they're scattered all over like you dumped the puzzle. And you need to put this puzzle together. And this is what ESG looks like in our organization. And here's how we can work together collaboratively. Now, what's important is to provide clear accountability structures. Accountability is different from responsibility. Your responsibilities I can outsource. I can give tasks to other people or outsource them to other entities. Accountability means I own this. If there's an issue, I have to step up to it. And what's needed for good ESG right now is clear accountability. Who's leading this ESG strategy across the organization? And what are the departments that are involved and what's their accountabilities? Now, developing an ESG strategy starts with at the top and understanding what our policies are. That's what I ask, and that's coming up in a couple of slides, but the very first foundational step to an ESG management strategy is what are your policies currently state? Well, whenever I get asked, and it seems just about every day I'm being asked this now, how do we start an ESG program? My first response is, what do your policies tell you today? What is your code of conduct? What's your inclusivity and diversity policies? What's your environmental policies? That defines your current ESG program of what your values are and commitments. Maybe some of those need to be modified or changed. And from there, who's going to be accountable? Who's leading this? Is the chief ethics and compliance officer, which to me really is the chief integrity officer of the organization? That's where I see a lot of ESG management being led by, but sometimes it's legal, a few times it's operational risk. Smaller to mid organizations, it might be audit. But who's leading the strategy and what are the departments involved? What are the ESG management processes in play in the organization to be able to set objectives for environmental, social governance, to map the risks to those objectives, to do assessments on those objectives and risks, to the actual reporting, and when we find issues, the resolution of those? Well, what's the role and process of managing and keeping policies current and training on that related ESG? And then what's your information technology architecture that can automate this and manage this and make it much more efficient, effective, and agile in your organization? Now, at OSEG, the Open Compliance and Ethics Group, I'm an OSEG fellow with them, and I've done work for them over 20 years now. And we have the GRC capability model. And GRC is defined as the capability to reliably achieve objectives. That's the governance And we might have ESG objectives. We might have entity, department, division, process, project level objectives. We set those objectives and then address uncertainty. ISO 31000 is the international risk management standard. And it says risk is the effect of uncertainty on objectives. Risk is about measuring uncertainty and achieving objectives. And then we act with integrity, the compliance. So GRC is a capability to reliably achieve objectives, address uncertainty, and act with integrity. And the GRC capability model builds all these capabilities out, and it applies so well to ESG. To me, GRC is how ESG gets done. Just a few months ago in October, I was the host and keynote at the #Risk conference in London. And one of the sessions that they sort of surprised me with was, and they didn't give me any prep time for this or anything, but it was supposed to catch me a little bit off guard. But it was a conversation where the father of GRC, myself, meets the father of ESG, the individual that worked with the United Nations to coin the term ESG, the acronym. And we had a great collaboration, and that really it comes down to governance. And we both agreed that GRC is how ESG gets done. Now, what's important here is that we apply the GRC capability model specifically to an ESG context. It starts with the learn component. We understand our external and internal contexts, the regulations, the expectations of stakeholders, our own culture, and we understand what is ESG in our environment. And again, this is continuous monitoring this. We align, we set our direction. Here's what ESG is. Here's our mission vision statement. Here's who's on board. Here's our objectives for environment. Here's our social objectives. Here's our governance objectives. We identify the risk to those objectives. We assess that, and we design our program. Well, that designing of our program includes what are the policies out there, the controls, the training and communication engagement on policies and training, the incentives and assessments and responses to issues. And we monitor and review the environment, we provide assurance with audit, and we improve our program over time. But as I stated, policies are the foundation that ESG is built upon. It starts with your policies. I'll state this, and nobody's been able to argue this with me. And actually, people really don't try to, because it would go against common sense. But you cannot do ESG without policies. Policies are the foundation for environmental social governance. Anybody starting an ESG program starts with looking at what do our policies state, and then do they need to be revised? From our code of conduct to environmental policies, to modern slavery policies, to diversity inclusion policies, to privacy policies, bribery and corruption policies, governance policies. Policies are the backbone, the foundation that any ESG program is built upon. It's absolutely essential. You cannot deliver ESG without policies. But too often, policies are in disarray. Organizations don't even know what policies they have. I was keynoting at a conference before COVID-19. There's 200 people in the room, and I asked them the question, who has a master index of all of your policies? That the external regulators, law enforcement, opposing counsel in a lawsuit, whoever it might be, your auditors, they want to see a master list of all the official policies of the organization. Who can produce it? 2 people out of 200 raised their hand. I was teaching my policy management by design workshop in New York. A global bank was there, and they said, gosh, we don't even know what policies we had. They spent 3 months doing a policy discovery process of just their policies in North America and found over 5,000 policies. Then they went on to the rest of the world and found 5,000 more policies. A lot of organizations don't even know what policies they have. One healthcare organization in California, had found out that over the last 20, 30 years, after acquiring nearly 30 hospitals, they had 18,000 policy and procedure documents. I mentioned that in New York, and this other healthcare system out of New York said, we could beat that. We have 21,000 policy and procedure documents because every hospital we acquired came with completely redundant sets. I built the business case for a large global European bank in policy management as they look to go to RFP this year. And they had one policy that went through 75 reviewers and a linear document check-in, check-out, took 6 months to get updated. And the policies are all over the place. Organizations are mismanaging policies. I'm getting on a whole soapbox now, but you can see we got to get a handle on policies and related to that training. Policies are governance documents. In fact, Starbucks and Suncor Energies that I've interacted with, they both call their policy management program their governance documents program. Why? They help them reliably achieve objectives. Whether in different processes like the barista or whatever it might be, Suncor Energy being a petroleum, they help have consistent processes and outcomes. They help us reliably achieve objectives. They're governance documents. Policies are also risk documents. The very fact that we have a policy means there's a risk. And that risk was significant enough that somebody had to sit behind a word processor and write a document and call it a policy. And so we need to map our policies to our risk. And of course, policies are compliance documents. They help us manage the integrity of the organization. Now, when it comes to ESG, we need to be able to engage policies and deliver training at all levels of the organization, from the senior executives at the top down to the frontline employees out there in the processes and business units and so forth. You know, policies and training affect all levels of the organization in context of ESG. And we need to be able to engage on them. We want to be able to say that where the employee says receiving information through coordinated and defined channels, like our host today, Echo and Learning Zone, you know, that they allow the employees to be more efficient and effective and agile. You know, where they can also say we have formalized the organization, common terms, communication channels, and consistently applied principles and methodologies, sustaining effective and efficient governance, risk, and compliance processes. You know, the policies and procedures align for ESG with their job and are written in a language they can understand and delivered through training they can understand. All this gets back to what I call the human firewall. It's essential to ESG in organizations. We focus on a variety of firewalls. In our physical environments, it's the real firewalls that helps prevent the spread of fire, should there be some. But a lot of times we talk firewalls, we're talking about network security, those guardian gateways at the borders of our networks for the protecting us from the evils of the internet. You know, the corporate network firewall. But the most important firewall in the organization, particularly today in an ESG context, is the human firewall. Employees, business partners, contractors, consultants, temporary workers, they're working on our processes. Those individuals, those people out there make decisions. Sometimes it's mistakes in an inadvertent thing. Sometimes it's malicious activity. We need to bolster and focus on the human firewall in this ESG context. The first element of that is well-written and maintained policies that can be understood at all levels. In the context of ESG, I was reviewing one global organization's supply chain code of conduct. I was amazed. This is a large global organization with thousands of supply chain relationships. And this organization had this supply chain code of conduct that at the time, it was published only in English, not in other languages, even though it was going out to an international audience, most of which would have English as a second language. And it was written in the passive voice and not the active voice, with long, complex paragraphs and legalese. And what really struck me is that the very first paragraph says company believes. The second paragraph says company strongly believes. So we have different levels of belief in the supply chain code of conduct? I don't think so. It was careless writing. But we might read right past that. But somebody has English as a second language is going to see that second paragraph where it has that word strongly believes. And that word strongly was in the first paragraph, says that second paragraph is more important than the first. That poorly written. No, we need well-written and maintained policies to support ESG in our environment. Then we need ESG understanding and engagement. How can employees access those policies? Is there a singular portal? Do they have to go out and try to comb through policies on 28 different portals that are file share, SharePoint sites, commercial software and things, and find out, you know, where was that, inclusivity policy? Well, it's out there in the HR website. Oh, it's also over here in this handbook, and they're different. You know, we need a consistent singular source for all official policies in the organization, that portal where employees can go to and access them. In that portal, we also need to deliver clear training, ESG training awareness on those policies, from code of conduct down to inclusivity and diversity and harassment, discrimination and privacy and modern slavery policies and everything else. But bad things will happen, and we also need clear channels of issue reporting, like hotline, whistleblower systems. You know, that's also part of the human firewall. It's not just the policy and training portal, but it's also how do we report issues when we see issues of misconduct, fraud, bribery, and corruption. You know, inclusivity and diversity issues in the organization. That people know how to report that, so that we can contain risks when they're small before they grow out of control. And we have to deliver this not just to traditional brick and mortar offices and employees, but also across the extended enterprise, the suppliers, vendors, outsourcers, service providers, contractors, consultants, temporary workers, and more. All this is critical for the human firewall in today's modern, complex, distributed organization. So what's essential is that we have clear understanding of how do we communicate and train on policies in the environment. Some policies we need to just distribute and make people aware of the policy. Other policies have a little more risk, or not only we need to make them aware of it, we need to get some type of acknowledgement, attestation, read and understood. But then there's a lot of policies that bear a lot of risk that we also need to deliver training on those policies as well. We also need to have push versus pull mechanisms. The pull is methods for employees to find and understand a policy, where somebody's trying to ask, well, that conduct I just saw, that seems a little suspicious. Was that harassment or was that discrimination? Where can I go out and find that policy and harassment discrimination in that interesting training that I went through a couple of years ago, or hopefully this past year? Where can I find that? These are methods where the employee can go out to the policy portal, find policies, training, and things that they're looking for. It might be rather benign. It's like, okay, I want to give this gift to a vendor or a third party. What's the hospitality gift entertainment policy? Where is that? And can I give this gift? Other times it's like, I saw something suspicious. I want to go back and verify and see if I should report this. But that's that policy pull. Policy push is where we push policies out there. We just revised the code of conduct to align with our ESG focus going forward. Now we need to make everybody aware there's a new code of conduct. You got to read it. You got to go through this training. That's the policy push mechanism. The policy pull is where the employee can go and find what they're looking for. The policy push is when there's changes and awareness issues and things, we can push it out to the employees to make them aware. Now, all policies related to ESG and beyond need a clear engagement plan. What's the purpose and goal of the policy? What are we trying to achieve? How do we communicate? What's our audience? Can we break our audience down in different risk levels? Like audience that might be a high focus of this policy, because if there's an issue, they're the ones that bear the highest risk in this area. And to moderate, low risk, or no risk, because maybe a policy doesn't apply to that role or department or function. What are the resources needed to leverage and engage people on training and policy awareness, like a portal, like with our host Learning Zone with their Echo platform today? How do we make policies and training accessible, anytime, any place, mobile, but also accessible for those that have disabilities or different language needs? How do we measure the effectiveness and engagement on ESG-related policies and training and alignment and stakeholders? All this is critically important. Now, what's also important is that we be able to build that communication plan and deliver it, where we can distribute the policies, ask for certification, attestation, acknowledgement of them, and also deliver training where it's necessary as well. This all comes together in what I would find as that very intuitive and engaging portal for policies and training from an enterprise perspective, but also specifically today in an ESG perspective, where this portal can be available on the desktop to laptop to tablet to mobile devices. And then this portal is intuitive, adaptive, personal, and accessible, where it's engaging there. Like, here's an insider trading policy. This would be part of the G in ESG, dealing with insider trading, where we can find out key definitions and map regulations and procedures, where the training's embedded in the portal and the policy as well. Every week at least every month, I'm getting inquiries for people looking for solutions in the market that say, our employees, they go out to Facebook and things for personal time, and they can watch a YouTube video in Facebook. They don't have to click on a link, go out, watch the video in YouTube, and then come back to Facebook to make a comment. They said our portal for policies and training should act the same way. Here's the policy, here's the training on the policy. You don't have to bounce out to different systems and things like that, but there's a singular view into policies and training in a broad enterprise context, but particularly for our ESG as well. Now, all this requires defensible ESG. What are we communicating and engaging? What was the version of the policy and what date and time? Who read it? Who understood it? Were there exceptions to the policy? If you want to defend yourself, you need to have a clear view into policies. One area of ESG is anti-bribery and corruption. U.S. Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, U.K. Bribery Act, CEP&DO in France, Australia's Bribery Act, and many more. One of my favorite cases out there goes back a decade, to 2012. It was the Morgan Stanley case. There's a memo on the Department of Justice and SEC website right today. You can go out and find it. And if you can't find it, I'll send you the link. It's out there today. And it praises Morgan Stanley. The FCPA was passed in 1977. So 2012, this is 35 years into FCPA history. Again, this is part of the G in ESG. And up to this point, every company that had bribery and corruption happening was prosecuted. that we know of. Morgan Stanley is the first time that a company had bribery and corruption happening. Mr. Peterson, the Asian real estate business, was doing bad things. And they didn't prosecute Morgan Stanley. They just prosecuted Mr. Peterson. And there's a glowing memo on the Department of Justice website today praising Morgan Stanley's compliance program. Most of it's about policies and training. Morgan Stanley had policies to address bribery and corruption. These policies are kept current as regulations change, risks change, the business change. Morgan Stanley can demonstrate how many times Mr. Peterson and other groups of personnel were communicated, reminded on policies, trained on policies, attested to policies. It was that documented defensible evidence trail. In this era of ESG, you need completely defensible evidence trail of who accessed the policy. You look at the Department of Justice evaluation compliance programs guidance today in the United States, and there's a huge focus on that specific aspect of that defensible evidence trail. You can talk about the policy portal and who accessed the policy. You need that, and that's critical in broad compliance situations, but particularly in ESG context today as well. So with that, I'm going to turn this back over to our host, Learning Zone Echo, to hear some of their thoughts and how they're delivering the technology that enables everything I was just talking about.
Thanks, Michael. Wow, that was very thorough. Appreciate that. Definitely, if you just can give me back the host permission so I can also share my screen. We definitely see in many of the organizations that we work with that the challenge of communicating policies down to the employee level, making it very effective, reaching or being able to connect the right policies to the right employees. And this is what we are solving here with the Echo. And since our time is quite short, I will quickly switch and do a quick demo so everyone can see. Michael, can you just return, switch me back to become a host again? Okay, I reclaimed it. Let me see. Okay, good. So just for those who, 1 second, you can see my screen. Just for those who don't know who we are yet, so quickly, Learning Zone is a creator of Echo. Echo is a powerful technology that basically aligns the organization with its workforce by pairing organizations, policies, procedures, learning and development with their daily routines, and we do it in real time. The way Echo works, so we allow our clients to upload their policies, procedures, any document, whether it's a Word document, PDF document, to our system and manage the entire process from there. They can edit, they can, they have a workflow to create policies. They can convert the policy quite easily to become an interactive conversational policies. Then we allow to connect these policies to learning, training, personal development skills, in order to build a end-to-end user experience where employees can receive tailored and personalized and contextual policies that are aligned with their learning and training, and bring all this experience in one single platform that is quite simple to use, and it's all powered by AI. The way our technology works, we actually allow uploading those documents. Our system learns, if you will, the content of those policies and creates an experience where users can interact with this content using their voice. And I will switch to a quick demo so you can see how actually that works. Share my screen. Okay, so I hope you all can see my my screen. And 1 second. Sorry for that. I have a problem with connecting my mobile phone. I will share a separate video on that on this video. I'll just show you the backend system and how it works. As you can see, this is the web app of our software. And you can see that within the app, I can actually manage policies and procedures, manage my learning and training, including certifications, specific courses, on-site, face-to-face training, on-the-job training, and many learning capabilities. We have channels here that allows users to communicate with each other using chat and develop skills. If I access the policy and procedure management, an admin or a user who is responsible for writing policies has an access to the entire company policies from which they can create either new policies or edit existing ones. For example, I can go in and select a specific policy, and while editing it and adding additional information on it, I can basically, per policy, can connect policies to one another by relating policy to one another. I can assign policies to existing courses in the system and create a relation between the policy and existing learning experiences about that specific topic, and then take it through to other places. I can also assign policy to a physical location. So once that's done, our system, our AI actually, when the user uses our app, identifies who's the user, what the user's profile, the role, to which department they belong to, who their managers are, what their location is. And based on that, it knows to make the calculation and push the policy to that person at the right time. It could be when a user arrives to an environment which has some safety issues. So the relevant policies will be pushed to those users at the time they arrive to that location. So before they access, they will be able to read the policy, attest to it, and access it. We have one of our clients, a refinery, that uses this functionality. And when their partners arrive to specific locations, before they can access the location, our system pushes the notification or the policy to that user who needs to read and attest. Once they attest the policy and maybe they are taken to a course to complete a quick quiz, then we communicate with the electronic door system and allow the users to access to the specific location. Those policies, when I access as a user, so when I access to my learning environment, I can see actually a whole picture that is relevant to me. Again, everything here is personalized per user. We usually communicate with the HR system or Active Directories to get user information and learn their profile. And based on that, we know to provide the specific certifications, onboarding programs, and policies that they need to attest to. And the content here, as well as in the mobile system, is dynamically changing. It changes based on my previous activities I've been taking, whether I was certified or not certified. It's dynamically changing based on my role. And if I change my role in the organization, so the information here will be updated automatically. It's also changing based on the location I am located right now, and it will provide upfront all the information that is relevant to that specific location. In this case, if I scroll down and look at those policies I have, and for example, I will access the whistleblower policy, I can review the policy and attest to it, or either agree or disagree. I can manage what attestation buttons I want to provide, but I also can see different histories about the revision history, who approved the policy or not, and then to which courses this policy is connected to. So I can click on the link here, and directly it takes me to the right course from which I can launch here an e-learning module about code of conduct, which I can learn, maybe have a quiz to do. And all this information is being tracked in the history of that specific employee. I'm also, in this case, the user I'm using here in the system is also a manager. So he has a team of people that he manages. So as a manager, I can look at my team, how they are performing, and I can see per user, like how they are doing with their policies, with their certifications, with their courses, and get more detailed information per user in my team and get an overall understanding of how are we doing with our compliance. I can even go to specifically to a specific employee and get more detailed information about their competency. Since policies are connected to courses and certifications, and these courses and certifications can connect to competencies and skills that the user can achieve. So I can get an overall view of the specific roles that the users are taking, and if those roles are also tied into a regulatory process or any other process that is tied to policies and procedures, I can drill down to each one of these skills here and get more detailed information of how users are doing. So overall, I'm getting a high-level picture of my team. Of course, I also have reports to support that. So if I go into one of those reports, so here I can get a dashboard that shows me on a department level how my team is doing, what is their competency or certification level in specific areas. So I can see that the management department has 100% completion, while the sales department achieved only 56% completion. Again, I can drill down per user and see how they are doing in a specific certification and whether they passed, expired, or due to expire, as well as the policy. I can go and drill down and see overall how many are tested, while how many didn't attest, and get detailed information about every user in my team, in this case, that they read a policy, whether they attested to it or not, where they attest to it, and then get more information, all within a single platform where we connect all these elements of compliance, learning and training, and skill development in one unified platform. Again, I apologize that I was not able to show, I have some technical issue here to share my phone on the monitor so I could show you how it works, but I promised to send a video that demonstrates how it works. Well, we had a plan to run through a QA now, but it looks like that we might have a problem with the chat function today, and we are a few minutes over time already. If you email your questions through to us, we'll collect and summarize the responses when we send out the recording. So thank you everyone for joining us today, and to Michael for sharing such a great insight. Keep your eyes on your inboxes for the recording and links to other resources, and we hope to see you on another webinar soon. In the meantime, if there's anything you'd like to discuss further, or you'd like to arrange one-on-one demo of ECHO for your organizations, please get in touch. Thank you, everybody, and thanks for joining us.